former Senator Tom Coburn, and he's the author of a book which I just finished today. The name of the book, of course, Smashing the DC Monopoly. And this is going to be the nature of our discussion today, talking about his book and about how to smash the DC monopoly, especially given all of well, everything that's going on in Washington, D.C. Dr. Coburn, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
I'm pleased to join you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'll tell you, it's our distinct pleasure and honor. And for those who don't know, Senator Coburn, he was elected to the House of Representatives back in 1994, and that was part of that. Remember the Republican Revolution where things were going to change? Well, to his credit, I have to say that Senator Coburn was a big part of that. What was changed, and he and his wife Carolyn, by the way, is a former Miss Oklahoma, married back in 1968. They've got beautiful children, grandchildren. What a great family, and they're leaders of their community. But Senator Coburn, with respect to your book, Smashing the DC Monopoly, if I can start out by asking you this question, a big part of this book is Article 5 of the Constitution. I guess coming out of the gate here, how would you describe the problem or the Beltway, having been an insider, and how do we fix it as you map out here in your book, Smashing the DC Monopoly?
Well, the problem, pardon me, the problem is we keep sending people to Washington who become a part of Washington, and they breach the trust that they have with us, and then their goal is to have a position of power, not to fix the problems of our country. And, I'm sure that's always been to some degree part of the problems in Washington. But we over the last 60 years have built out a gigantic, uncontrollable behemoth in Washington through the career politicians, much to the deficit of our kids and our grandkids. And so what happens is most people who go to Washington succumb to the power and the trappings of power rather than keep their oath. As a matter of fact, one of the things I did was challenge the Senate most of the time I was in it, is to look at your oath. Your oath doesn't say anything about your state. It says something about our country and the best long-term policies for our country. But if you look at the Senate today, 2/3 of them have never had a real job. All they are is career politicians, both parties. And they're going to make decisions that are best for them, not best for the country. And so we see the consequences of that, and we've seen it. I served 3 terms in the House, came home, and 4 years later they talked me into running for the Senate. I served 10 out of the 12 years there and came and left. And I left because I don't see a solution for our country in Washington. I do see a solution for our country in Article 5. And Article 5 us to start deciding what's going to happen in our country rather than the elite Washington group that is there, who is supposed to represent our interests but don't. They represent the political class's interests.
If you don't mind, for those of us, many people out there who may have not paid too close attention in civics or history class or government class, can you just give us a rundown on the use, what Article 5 is?
Okay.
Specifically.
Now, Article 5 has 2 components in it. The second component during the Constitutional Convention was put in first, and then it was left out on the final drafting and was put back in. It was offered by Colonel George Mason, and what he stood up and asked the members of the Constitutional Convention, do you know of any time in history where a government has voluntarily ceded its power back to the people? And, of course, the learned men that were at the Constitutional Convention knew that had never happened. So they put in there a component in Article 5 that allows the states, 2/3 of the states agreeing, to call a convention of amendments whereby the states would gather and offer amendments back to the states for approval things that would fix and restore our Constitution. And so it would require 34 states to agree to very similar language to qualify to have a convention of amendments and a state convention of amendments. And what that state convention would do would be to discuss the areas in the application that were made and offer suggestions to the states on how we ought to reform and restore the government so that the people actually get to decide rather than the bureaucrats in Washington deciding for us. And it is the safety valve that's big enough to solve the problem that we have in front of us. And what it would do is return power to the states. One of the biggest mistakes I think our country ever made was allowing popular election of senators. Because
wow.
what used to happen is our state senates and state houses, when they saw a senator voting not in the best interest of state rights, they'd pull them. And they'd recall them, and they'd send somebody else to Washington that would protect the powers of the state.
Right.
And with the election through the 17th Amendment of popular election of the senators, that power was lost by the state legislatures.
You know, yeah, and I totally agree. And not too many people really understand the depth of that statement about the election of our senators and how that came about and the history behind that. And I find that fascinating. And I find it fascinating too that you're in favor of well, I guess changing that process. Now, with respect to Article 5 or the changes that you referenced, and by the way, folks, we're speaking with the Honorable Senator Tom Coburn, former senator, author of the book, by the way, Smashing the DC Monopoly. If you go to the WND bookstore, Superstore, and go there, use promo code Hagman. I highly recommend this book. You cannot believe what's in it, the information that's in it, and I really got an education that a sorely needed education by reading it, while also finding out about pork barrel projects, a bridge to nowhere, the Keynesian or Keynesian, I should say, economic debacles like the $840 billion stimulus package and such. But Senator, is the will there? We know the
climate, the political climate we have today. With this division, do you think the states would be able to come together and just agree upon basic principles to try to change this huge government bureaucracy we have?
Well, they either will or they won't. Our job is to educate the Americans on, as you go around the country, what you hear people, and Pew Research supports this, 90% of Americans don't trust Washington. Well, that's a disaster. Because that means that we have an illegitimate federal government if the fact that people don't support it. So rather than to have anarchy and all these other crazy that could happen as people's confidence in the rule of law, why not do what our founders gave us to restore the balance of power? And so our job is to educate America. Here's the most fun thing I do is to talk to people who've never heard about Article 5. Because most Americans think, well, there's just nothing to do. The politics is slanted. We can't have any influence on our congressmen or our senators. It's just going to be that way, and people are kind of giving up. And when you tell them you individually can make a difference by becoming an activist for Article 5 in your state, and convention of states, the resolution that would come through your state legislature, all of a sudden we get these Americans that are sick and tired of the federal government telling them what to do, when to do it, given liberties that were supposed to be protected for us in the Bill of Rights. Mm-hmm. So when you tell them about that, what you see is this big smile. Because the real question in America today is who decides? Who gets to decide about our future? Is it a career politician who's really not looking out for the best interest of the country, or should it be the people making that decision? And you'll have all your political scientists and everybody else say, well, they're doing what was intended. They're not doing what was intended. What was intended was a very small federal government, a very powerful state government, and everything that wasn't specifically spelled out for the federal government was reserved for the state. Well, we're just the opposite of that. And the average state's own revenues that they collect in their state, 60% of it is mandated by an unelected bureaucrat or bureaucratic rule. Nobody was ever elected that tells them what they have to do, but then it's enforced. It becomes law. And the annotated Constitution isn't a little bitty book that you can carry inside your coat pocket. It now weighs 82 pounds, but through all the bureaucratic regulations and laws that have been put forward and the judicial rulings that are against the Bill of Rights. So it's about restoring our Constitution and restoring our freedom. And I'm almost 70 years old, and I understand the tremendous loss of freedoms that have occurred during my lifetime as the government has ballooned to where it has its nose and everything. You know, Thomas Jefferson said this about education. He's kind of the father of education of our country. He built the University of Virginia. He said for the federal government to be involved in education would require a constitutional amendment. Now, think about that. Our original founders never intended for the federal government to be involved in education. Never. And yet,
true.
Education now is failing in America mainly to do because of the control, the rules, and the bureaucracy placed on states inappropriately and much to the deficit of learning in America.
Very interesting, and you're absolutely correct. In fact, the government has grown into this leviathan that's got its mitts into many things. And your political career, I must say, if folks, if you look at the political career of the Honorable Senator Tom Coburn, if you look at his political career, look at some of the positions he's taken, and I dare you to find any position that he's taken that is antithetical to the true conservative and even the Christian conservative platform. You won't find any. Very interesting, indeed. Yeah, the education system, of course, it was almost designed that way. It seems like. I don't want to go too far in the weeds here, but it just seems like it was. Our education system has failed us so badly. How is it even possible that it failed us as badly as it did by chance?
Oh, I think it's very easy to understand it. There's only two major things in our economy where we don't let the free enterprise system and competition allocate scarce resources. And those two things are healthcare and education. By any standard, the cost of healthcare is atrocious for what we get for it. And education is totally a failure in our country today because with 40% of the people graduating from high school and 30% that enter the ninth grade not graduating from high school, the 40% that do graduate have to be remediated before they can even take a college course. What we've done is we've not allowed parents and teachers to decide. We've allowed bureaucracies to decide. And there's no competition for excellence in the education system except in the private sector or in the parochial sector. And so what needs to happen is there needs to be competition for those dollars for excellence to rise and to be rewarded. And what we have is a continual downgrade of the quality of our education. There's exceptions all across the country. KIPP schools are phenomenal. I don't know if you know about them, but they target the poorest of the poor and the greatest sociologically disadvantaged kids, and they turn them around. But they're charter schools that control discipline and encourage and reward excellence. And if the teacher doesn't perform, they're gone.
It's merit-based. Yes, very familiar. Which is a good idea, and it should be applicable to across the board for a number of areas. Indeed, yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. I guess I do understand that now. With respect to the education, and you are correct. Um, wow. Yeah. Okay. The you had said, getting back to Article 5, if I can just revisit that again in today's climate. You do, because at least 2 chapters in your book, Smashing the DC Monopoly. And again, folks, go to WND Superstore. This is a fantastic book, a lot of great information in there. How long of a process would this be if, yeah, given the climate, given the people right now, the leadership in DC, as well as looking at the landscape across the United States, state-wise? I mean,
I think it's going to take us 2 or 3 more years.
okay.
I think next year we'll probably get 10 states.
Okay.
The vision of this is restorative. The vision of this is not to point fingers, but to restore. And when people figure out that people have scared them. They say, "Oh, you can't do this." And of course, one of the reasons I wrote the book is to make sure everybody understood. Here's what our founders did. Here's how our founders, before there was a United States of America, this is how they used amendments conventions in their own states to correct things. So the whole purpose of this is to restore us to a balance where the individual citizens gets to have a say in terms of what's going to happen to their future and their kids, and it's not left to some bureaucrat. So is it a high bar? Yes. To get 34 states to agree to anything is very, very difficult. But as people continue to see the decline in terms of, for example, we're now 17th in the world in terms of economic freedom.
Mm.
And people are asking why we're only growing 2%. We're only growing 2% because we've had a bureaucracy that's smothered free enterprise.
Sure.
And for 200 years, we led the world in terms of economic freedom. So it's not hard to understand why we're not growing at 4% and wages aren't accelerating, is because the regulatory state, the fourth branch of government, makes you spend thousands upon thousands of dollars for a business to prove that you didn't do something wrong, rather than them prove you did do something wrong. So the whole setup has changed, and what we have to do is we have to restore it. But as that progresses, people are going to see more and more, we got to do this. And remember, the future of republics isn't great.
That's
We're
true.
the longest standing republic. And if we want to save our country, then we have to restore the principles that built it in the first place. And that's self-sacrifice to accomplish something, personal responsibility, hard work, and reestablish what was destroyed during the Obama administration, the rule of law. The rule of law has to be the rule of law, and people have to have confidence in it. And if you do those things, then there's nothing that we can't do in terms of restoring a vibrant economy. Most of our young people under 40 have never seen a vibrant America. They've never seen it. And yet they have no knowledge. And by the way, the same Pew Research says they don't even know anything about their government.
Wow.
So when we lose on education and they have no knowledge about the freedoms and why they have them and how they got there, less than 4% of universities in the United States now require Western civilization as a requirement to graduate from college. Biggest mistake in the world, that we should know history. And yet the average millennial knows no history and knows no civics and knows no government. And yet we're at risk for that. So we ought to be about restoring those things. That's why I'm so happy that the competitive forces towards education are starting to return, because people are saying, let's use what we know works. Accountability works. Hard work works. Rewarding excellence works. And yet we've had all these institutions run by the government that are just the opposite of it. You realize in terms of fraud, there's about $250 billion a year in federal programs that are defrauded? I mean, people don't know that. 250 billion.
250 billion per year?
Yes, billion. And most Americans have no idea what a billion is. Let me tell you what a billion is. If you work for 25 years at $40,000 a year, you'll make $1 million. You have to work 25,000 years to make $1 billion.
Wow.
So we don't, we say those numbers, but we have no idea what it really means. And these are massive numbers. If you just take the earned income tax credit, that's $18 billion worth of fraud a year. People are cheating. If you take the new Medicaid expansion, half of the people who applied for the Medicaid expansion weren't eligible on the audits that have been done already. They lied. When you go and compare their auto loans to their application for Medicaid, they lied. So we've lost some of the moral structure of our country as well.
Sure we have.
It's just yeah. And so who's going to pay for that? And here's where my heart is. My heart is my dad was born in a mud hut in the plains of Colorado, had to go to work when he was 10 years old when his dad went to jail, built a big business, was very successful. That could have only occurred in our country.
Amen.
How do we get that back? How do we reward hard work, reward effort, reward innovation, and not reward lack of self-reliance, not reward dependency? Because dependency is depression. You are limiting the potential of millions of Americans by creating dependency rather than hard work and getting the rewards of that and earn success. So, it's almost tyrannical what we're doing. A couple of specifics. These aren't from me. These are from in 1963, the percentage of poverty in America that were below the poverty line was 2%. In 2007, actually 15. The percentage is 19.8%. Now there's 110 million more, and we've spent $37 trillion undermining self-reliance since 1963. The war on poverty was lost a long time ago, and now we have generation after generation rather than rewarding and giving lifeblood and happiness to earn success.
But
and all these things are changeable if we as Americans stop fighting and start looking. Do we care about our kids? Do we care about the future? Are we interested in what can happen in the future if we work together and start saying, you're going to pull your own weight, and if you can't, but we're not, and you're going to get out and do your fair share. And what that does is give back dignity to those people who are dependent.
You're exactly right. Our guest with us is the Honorable Senator Tom Coburn, the author of a number of books, but one in particular, Smashing the DC Monopoly. Folks, I'll tell you what, I cannot recommend a book any higher than this. This from a Washington insider, outlining exactly what we can do, what the problems are, but what Senator Coburn has done is compiled and provided the reader with a list of resources and organizations that are fighting for people. Smashing the DC Monopoly is our guide. It's anyone who's interested in standing up for the next generation, defeating the me first, as Senator just described, that me first Washington elite who are really bankrupting us and mortgaging our future. This is the guide. This is the book to get. And again, Smashing the DC Monopoly. Go to WND Superstore. Use the promo code Hagman. It's an enlightening book. Things like pork barrel projects, things like the stimulus package, things like the 20 trillion national debt, which is about 150,000 per citizen. It's just an amazing so much information in here. But Senator, what you had said, a couple of things. You had aptly described the generation, and I noticed during your tenure, during your term, your political life, very consistent on issues of morality, very social conservative, fiscal conservative, but very um, on the money with respect to, for example, abortion, very pro-life, anti-promiscuity, all of these. But this is a theme, I think, Senator, that's coming through that's running through our entire country, and in fact, all throughout the West. We are not only illiterate or have an illiterate generation in terms of laws, history, and such, but we also have and I use this perhaps not as pejoratively as it's meant, but degenerate kind of generation as well, generations that need fixing as well.
Well, there's great examples of that. My oversight committee in the Senate, we did a study on disability, and so we actually monitored 3 different Social Security offices throughout the country. And then we had independent people look at the rulings of the Social Security administrative law judges. And fully 50% of the people in this country who are on disability aren't disabled. But they don't think anything about taking the disability. So that tells us a lot.
Sure.
And the other thing is 1 in 15 people in America is on disability care. Do you really think 1 in 15 people is totally disabled? There's no job in the economy they can do. It's not true at all.
Man, that just, Senator, our history, my history, 30 years as an investigator in the private sector. And I did work for Fortune 100 insurance companies, big carriers. And then the
fraud.
Yeah, the number one issue was the disability fraud, followed by the theft. For example, someone got their 71 Pinot stolen with a Rembrandt in the trunk. But and I've testified before against, I should say, federal judges for fraud. I mean, it knows no social status. There's no stigma attached to this fraud. It's amazing.
Well, but we've taught that in our schools. Is you can't dare embarrass somebody because they've made an error intentionally. There's no shame used anymore. That's why I like KIPP schools. Is if you're misbehaving in a KIPP school in the earlier grades, they make you wear your shirt inside out so everybody knows you were misbehaving. And so they use the forces for good, and this idea that you can't stand up and say that's wrong. I mean, remember how much press you get if somebody takes a stand and say this isn't right. The press comes after you like crazy. How dare you say it's not right? Some people are doing it. So the standard is whatever feels good's okay. But that isn't a standard for a free country to survive by. It won't survive because it implies that you don't have a rule of law and that the rules don't matter. And that whatever you can get by with, you get by with. So anyhow, Tocqueville said America's great as long as it remains a good country. As soon as the people become not good, America won't be great anymore. So we have a lot of work to do, but most of it we need to be working on is what we can do individually, both through the Convention of States.
Right.
ConventionofStates.com is the organization that runs all of this, and the volunteers that have come, 2.2 million volunteers. Think about that. That's where we are today in this effort.
Okay.
There's 2.2 million people have signed up to help, and we want to grow that to about 10 million.
Doable. This is doable. The convention. Okay, so conventionofstates.com is where people can go to.
Right, and that's where I took nothing for writing this book. The guy that helped me research it has taken nothing. There's no profits that come to me at all. It all goes towards this effort of having an amendments convention where we actually restore our freedom and restore the Constitution back to its original intent.
Senator, I've heard discussions about Article 5, and I've looked at this. Is there any danger or downside to this?
Yeah, the only danger or downside to it is not doing it.
Okay.
What you hear from two groups. You hear from the hard left that, oh no, you'll take away our individual rights, you'll do all this, and you hear from the hard right that, oh, we can't do this. They'll take away our Second Amendment. They'll open up the whole Constitution. I spent a lot of time in this book to explain how this thing works and why that doesn't happen. But here's the point: is you remember what this process is. First of all, you have to have 34 states that agree to the three parameters that we've outlined to have a convention to discuss just in those three areas. That's number one. Number two is anything that's outside of those areas, even if it were to pass an amendments convention, it's just a recommendation. But even if it passed the amendments convention, Congress would never send it to the states because it would be outside the parameters under which the application was made. So we have an application for three things: fiscal responsibility, i.e. balanced budget amendment using real accounting instead of the cheating accounting that the federal government does every year. Number two, limit the scope and jurisdiction of the federal government. In other words, restore the states' rights, put the decision-making back in the hands of the states. And finally, limit the terms of both appointed and elected officials. So that's the only three areas where that can work. But let's say that all the naysayers are right and they do something other than that. So first thing that happens is the Congress can do anything like that now. And everybody isn't shaking in their boots because they know they wouldn't do it, right? They wouldn't do anything detrimental to our freedom.
Right.
Other than what they've done is the frog in the slowly heating, boiling water. So the Congress can do it now. The states are much less likely to do something. The Congress has already proven it'll do anything to enhance their power and lessen our power.
That's true.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is Congress would never send it to the states because they'd get sued because it's outside the parameters. The third thing is the states aren't a bunch of yokels. I've been in 27 states in the last year. And every state legislature I come up against is really pretty well informed about their own state, and they're really informed about wanting freedom and really informed about wanting to make decisions closer at home where we can actually have an impact on them. So to think, remember, anything that comes out of this convention would have to have 38 states say yes. That means, so let's take, for example, the bad scenario that the hard right takes. They're going to take away your Second Amendment right. Well, do you really think there are 38 states that would do that? And that there's not 13 judiciary chairmen in either the House or the Senate in other states that would say, we're not taking that up. That's stupid. That's crazy. Something like that wouldn't get 10 states supporting it. So what
exactly.
You have to think about, and if you actually believe that, you're schizophrenic to begin with.
Exactly, because I've seen that. I've seen the argument that you just described, and to me that's just ludicrous, given the safeguards built in. Go ahead, sir.
It's impossible.
Right.
It's impossible. If we have 10 million people, and that's the reason we're building this army, because once we get to convention, we want to make sure the good things to restore things actually pass in 38 states. So it's going to take a grassroots army to make sure that happens. And so we're not about to let something crazy happen. Nobody is. Nobody wants that. What we want is freedom. We don't want loss of freedom. There's no risk for loss of freedom. What we want is a bureaucrat who wasn't elected to anything to quit making decisions about our kids' lives.
Amen.
What we want is a true economic model that gives real economic freedom so that if you have a good idea and you work hard, you get rewarded for it. What we want is a economic system where you don't have wage stagnation, and that the average person can grow their wealth and their material well-being more than inflation every year, so that their boat will rise. That's what we want. We want everybody to get ahead, and we don't want to do it by sacrificing our freedoms we have now. That's why we're not growing now. We want to reverse that trend. So nothing could be further from the truth than those people. And here's the final point I'll make. When you're in a group of people and there's an idea and there's pretty good consensus, there's always this one person that their legitimate complaints are all based on fear.
Yes.
Well, this country wasn't founded on fear. This country was founded on courage. And if we want to keep it, we have to have courage to do the right thing, the thing our founders gave us to solve the problems that we're experiencing today. Fear is our enemy.
Absolutely.
Courage is our ally.
Amen to that. And I would direct our listeners and our viewers to the website conventionofstates.com. They're explained very well. And folks, this website, there's so much information. And through this website, you can volunteer, you can become informed, you can become a leader. But it outlines the problem, of course, as the Honorable Senator Tom Coburn has, about the federal government, which has overreached constitutionally established boundaries. The solution, which is the invocation of Article 5 of the United States Constitution. And then, of course, the strategy, which is laid out within this website. And by the way, Senator, I have to say that in looking at this in preparation for the interview, I found it very interesting. What was it? The late 70s, early 80s, I don't recall, panel discussion about Article 5 with Antonin Scalia. I just thought that was really interesting, how that was laid out.
Well, he's been misquoted. The people who are against this only misquote one statement he said out of context. But if you look at what he said and his embracement of this, and if you knew him at all, and I got to know him personally because he loved opera, and my daughter's an opera singer. This guy loved the Constitution, but he loved freedom more. And if we were alive today and we were to ask him, he'd totally, fully embrace what we're doing.
I sense that. I've got no basis for it other than reading through the website, the paper, which I think I downloaded in a PDF format. I don't specifically recall, but reading through that, I kind of sense that. And by the way, folks, again, our guest here, we just have him for a short amount of time longer, is the Honorable former Senator Tom Coburn. He's also a medical doctor. By the way, talk about courageous, a cancer survivor as well, and busy as all get out. Would you say 27 states in the last year you were in?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Okay.
I've spent 2 weeks at home this year so far.
Well, welcome home for the 2 weeks. But his book, Smashing the D.C. Monopoly, Using Article 5 to Restore Freedom and Stop Runaway Government, is really a guidebook, and I think it's probably one of the best instruction manuals for the American citizen today on the problem. And I'm a proponent for this for this initiative. I really am, looking at it. If I can ask you a couple of more questions that are at the periphery of this discussion. Of course, we've seen your pictures. You're seated next to Barack Obama, and discussing things with former President Barack Obama. What's your overall, and answer this however you'd like, but what's your overall feeling with respect to the 8 years of Obama in the White House? How would you describe that as being, so close to watching all that transpire?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think Jimmy Carter's the happiest man in the world right now because he's no longer the worst president of the United States. That's number one. Number two is Barack Obama is an honest intellectual. He truly is a pure socialist. I mean, if you remember, he said, "I want to change America."
Yep.
And then he did everything he could to do it. As a man, I really like him individually. I don't agree with hardly anything. We agreed on a couple of things when he was in the Senate with me, and we passed a couple of bills together. One of them was a transparency bill, which is really a good thing that we're seeing play out now. But he, if you think about it, his whole life experience was totally opposite of mine. I mean, he came from a mixed race family, which did not have significant means, had opportunities through programs to advance himself. He worked hard. He's smart, but he just came out on the other side saying, "Well, socialism's a better thing than freedom."
And you both arrived at the Senate in the same year.
Yeah, we did. And so here's the other thing: is if you want to change people, you got to love them.
Mm.
You don't have to agree with them, but if you love them, all of a sudden they know you care, and so then they'll listen to you. So what we have today going on in Washington isn't about trying to get people to listen to you. It's about yelling at people rather than trying to change people's point of view by being courteous, kind, and loving them. And that's one of the things that I think the Senate really lacks today, because we've gotten all this hard-edged partisanship and lack of integrity, too. Harry Reid had the least integrity of anybody I've ever met in my life, and he was the majority leader of the Senate, which was very disappointing. And that matters. When we say integrity doesn't matter, there's all sorts of ramifications to having leaders that don't have integrity.
Amen.
And we have to be about guarding against that. Anyhow, my time with, even after I left the Senate, I got calls from him on a friendship basis. And people knew me well enough to know that I wasn't kissing somebody's behind, that I actually had an affection for an individual who I disagreed with. And if you think about it, that's what the good book tells us to do: love our neighbor.
Amen. That's right. Regardless of our ideological differences, of course.
Right.
To see what's taking place breaks my heart, because the civility is gone, the decorum seems to be gone, or certainly on its way out. There's so much hubris among people, and it is kind of heartbreaking to see this happen in America. Which brings me.
Well, what I see, what I observed, was the arrogance of power, and that arrogance leads to poor judgment. And see, that's where I think we are today. These people have the capability to get along, but the judgment they're making through their own arrogance is I don't have to do that.
Mm.
I'm right. They got to listen. In other words, the arrogance leads to this lack. And so it tells you that the basic character traits of a lot of our people who represent us in Washington have a character flaw in them, is they actually believe their own press releases.
True. That's a good way to put that. Okay. Yeah. And in that same respect, and again, we're just having a conversation, and I'm just curious with respect to President Donald Trump and all of the flack that's taking place and all of the attacks and everything that's going on. Do you see, or how do you see this playing out, if you even want to go there? How do you see what's taking place?
Well, look, I'm happy. I voted for Donald Trump for one reason: that's Supreme Court judges. I think he has a significant personality disorder called narcissistic personality disorder, and I think that explains his tweeting and some of his quirkiness. But in terms of what he's done so far, other than tweeting, some of the decisions he's made, some of the appointments he's made, the regulation, the deregulation that he's done, we haven't had a president do anything close to that in a long time. So, nobody's perfect, and he certainly isn't. Who knows if there's anything going on We certainly have 80% of the media that absolutely hates him, and 80% of the elites in America, the fourth estate hates him.
Mm-hmm.
The dark state hates him, and so he's not going to have a fun time over the next 3.5 years because they're out. They didn't get their way, and they're out to make it painful because they didn't. It's not good for America. I doubt many of those people's patriotism in terms of loving our country and trying to make it work. But I think we wait and see. With the arrogance that you have with a narcissistic personality disorder, he's going to make a lot more mistakes. We just got to be ready for him.
But all things considered, given the landscape, given the situation as we see it, I do believe that perhaps there's no better time or even no better reason to implement which you recommend in your book, Smashing the DC Monopoly.
Sure, it's time to bring the decision-making back home.
That's right.
The fact that you can't even turn on the news today without getting depressed because you're hearing the same garbage that's attack, and there's no balance in the news, and there's no balance on either side in the news, it tells you that, what you have is a circular knowledge area in our country called Washington, D.C., inside and outside the Beltway, that is dysfunctional and isn't in alignment with doing what's best for our country. So that's the other reason to have an Article 5. Let's bring the decision-making back home. Why should there ever be another building built for the federal government in Washington, D.C., where the average federal employee fully absorbed makes $139,000 a year and the average American makes less than $70 fully absorbed? Explain that to me. Why should we have another federal employee making at those kind of levels twice what the average American makes?
That's right.
So it's a mess. It's totally a mess. And what we need, and his leadership right now on a lot of these issues is right. He just didn't get any credit for it.
That's right. Very well said.
And I think he's a carnival barker. He's one of those guys out there selling you a deal. And I think that's how his business career was. But I think overall, I'd give him a B for what he's done so far. Our problem is our young people don't have anything to compare to.
Yeah,
if you think about it, the last great president we had was Reagan.
I was going to say, would that be an apt comparison, perhaps, or even that?
No, he doesn't come anywhere close to. He has, in terms of the regulatory environment, markedly done more than Reagan did.
Right.
But in terms of a country lives off a vision of its leadership. Mm. Reagan was great because it was positive, and he used humor to bring Americans along on things they didn't at first agree to. Sometimes later they did agree, but he led. And we look at the House, look at the Senate. Where's our leadership?
True.
We don't have any great leadership. And we need visionary, character-based leadership if our country is going to survive. We have big problems. There's no way we pay off the $144 trillion in unfunded liabilities that our millennials are going to absorb. That's $1,700,000 apiece.
That's right.
Over the next 50 years that the millennials, this 85 million Americans, are going to have to pay for. So what they're going to have is a standard of living far lower than what we're experiencing today. And it's all because the leadership in Washington failed to work on the real problems of our country because they were too busy worrying about their own political careers.
And you've that's exactly right. You've said it. You've said it all. And again, we commend you for your marvelous work smashing the DC monopoly and the initiatives, of course, laid out in the book, which, again, I would urge everyone to grab a copy of. And, of course, the website, conventionofstates.com, where the problem solution and the strategy is well defined. And
here's the challenge to your listeners.
Go ahead.
The next time you catch yourself complaining and you haven't read this book on how to fix it, shut up. Because you don't have, if you're going to complain but not work hard to fix it, you're not any better than the politicians in Washington.
Amen to that.
But if you want to complain, learn how to fix it. And this book will tell you how to fix it. It'll enthuse you. It'll give you hope. There are ways to solve our problems. And we, the people, are the ones that can do that. It's not the politicians. They're not going to fix our problems. Washington will not solve our problems. I mean, it's a joke they're even thinking about trying to fix health care. There's nothing Washington can do to fix health care except eliminate every federal law associated with it and let the states figure it out and let markets allocate scarce resources.
I had that same conversation with a gentleman today in a hospital room about his situation. And, his words, despite his condition, his words were, I'm not sure what made me feel worse, the procedure or the fact that I had to deal with all of the government bureaucracy in getting the procedure done. Yeah. It's just crazy.
Well, here's what we know, just so your listeners, and I may have, if I've repeating myself, let me know. We know that of the $3 trillion, $3.2 trillion that's spent on healthcare in America every year, that over 25% of it doesn't help anybody get well and doesn't prevent anybody from getting sick. So we know that a fourth of it's just total waste. Mm-hmm. Total waste. Nothing, no benefit from it whatsoever. The second thing we know is you can't know what something costs in healthcare ahead of time.
Yeah.
Unless you're really aggressive. And in my hometown, Tulsa, Oklahoma, if you want to go get an MRI at the hospital, it's going to cost you $3,700. But if you go down here to Servant Radiology, a guy that's a follower of Jesus that says, I'm out here to help people, you can get it done for $700.
Mm.
So why would you ever get it done for $3,700 when you can get it done for $700? Because somebody else is paying your bills. Because if it was really your money, you wouldn't spend that at all. You'd go to a place where you get it done for $700.
That's right.
So the only answer to healthcare in America is let's let markets work. Let's trust Americans to make good decisions. They will if you give them the information. So you got to have price transparency. So our problems aren't insolvable. We just got the wrong people working on them. We got politicians working on them instead of us. And we need to move it closer to home to where we can have control.
Wow. What an incredible and informative hour that we've spent together, Senator Coburn. My goodness, it's gone so quickly. In the remaining minute that we have, any additional words of wisdom, anything that you would like to promote? Of course, we're going to be promoting your book throughout the program and throughout the week and as the days go on, but is there anything close to your heart in closing?
Well, sure. One of the things I've done is help start a nonprofit foundation that actually is out there trying to educate millennials about our country and the free enterprise system and the importance of the rule of law and the importance of the Bill of Rights and free speech. And so we're trying to do that. We have to compete for the hearts and minds of our kids. The university system has sold them on socialism. And we have to be in the fight if we want to win. And it's not saying all 85 million of millennials are socialists, but how they've been indoctrinated causes them to question a great deal the great uniqueness and greatness of America. And we have to be in that fight. And so we ought to challenge every chance we get when a university says we're not for free speech. We ought to say, wait a minute, the money ought to stop going to this university. If you don't believe this is a place where people can offer their ideas and do it without significant pressure to conform to the status quo or political correctness. What we need is more discussion, not less. We need more thought, not less.
Senator, we are at the top of the hour network break. I just want to say thank you so much. Your nonprofit is what?
It's Foundation to Restore Accountability.
Foundation to Restore Accountability. All right, Senator, thank you so much for your gracious gift of time.
You bet. God bless you, and thanks for the time.
All right, brother. Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Putting the honorable back in, the honorable Senator. My goodness, Senator Tom Coburn, medical doctor, former senator, and just a dynamic man. a man that I've got a lot of respect for. Joe does as well.
Sign the petition at cosaction.com and get as many of your friends and family to do the same. With your full address, your state legislators will know that you really are their constituents in their district. Our success depends on you, so we're inviting you to be part of history. Let's invoke the constitutional solution that's as big as the problem.